You expect something.
Gentlemen, George Mina.
So it's my pleasure to welcome the winner of 2 demo jams at XML Prague and at DITA Europe.
You're still cross about it, right?
Also known as Forever Young, Jang Graat.
Yeah, is it on? Cool. It's on. Okay, so I did a talk at the DITA Online World Conference, and I had one slide that insulted some people, apparently. So I decided to insult everyone, so nobody excluded, including myself. I'm going to talk about DCQL. I tried to, I was going for SQL, like CQL, but that's already taken by the Apache Cassandra database language. So I decided to add the D. And what is this about? Well, this is just a little bit about me. Everybody knows me. Last year, I did a talk about at DITA Europe, the DITA Europe conference, where I announced the marriage of DITA, whom we all know and love dearly, with data, whom some of us geeks know and love dearly. So they were not, at that point, they were not really sure whether that was a happy marriage or not. It's like, okay, what have we gotten ourselves into? The topic of the talk was marrying data to data, because at a certain point, since a couple of years, I've been doing live transforms, which I call live data. You put the XML on the server, and then when you click on a page, that's when I do the transform. So that was live data. And then I started thinking about, hey, HTML5 has content editable, so then I made all of my data stuff editable in HTML and then write it back to data. So now everything, okay, now all the dams were broken, and then there's a whole flood of stuff that you can do. And basically I'm thinking, if you produce a content and it's an HTML page and it doesn't change anymore, basically that makes you a gravedigger because you're just producing corpses, right? I don't like that. I want to do live stuff, dynamic stuff. So I decided to figure out whether I could put data into an HTML page even after it has been published. And that's what I've been doing. So also this is based on the premise that you don't copy paste. So the one song that George was referring to when I won the demo jam at DITA Europe, that was the no copy, no paste. Well-known song by Bob Marley. I just adapted the lyrics a little bit, so no copy, no paste. But then a tech author is very often, they're doing all kinds of technical documentation for machines or whatever, and guess what? They open a database window and they look up the data and then they punch it into their data content, right? That's copy-paste to me. The data lives in the database. Don't copy it into your data content just because you have no method of pulling it out of the database and just inject it into your content. Because then if the content, if the data changes but nothing else on the topic, and still your author has to replace the data with the updated data, and he's copy-pasting again. That's pretty stupid, in my viewpoint. So what I've done is adding those database queries into the data content, into an attribute in the data content. And then, of course, I'm not going to bother an average technical author with the full SQL syntax. So I abstracted the syntax, made it easier to understand. And then I've also added a cascading component to it. So let's have a look at what that's going to look like. I'll come back to those other points later. So DSQL, Data Cascading Query Language. We have a data def, which is defined in the map. The data def identifies the data source. It says this is where the source is. You might have some kind of web-based access to the source. It also controls when the data query is executed, when your data reference is resolved. Then we have two attributes. I had one attribute, but then I had a long talk with Elliot in the past couple of days, and then decided, well, actually, this was like yesterday, right? Yeah, we decided yesterday that this was a good idea. So, if anybody thinks it's not a good idea, it's his fault. So we have a data ref, and a data ref is basically, that's a specialization of base, because I cannot use any of the other attributes. It's a specialization of base which says, okay, get this data from the database. Then we have a data context attribute. The data context doesn't say get data, but it just says, okay, this is the context within which you should try and find that data, right? So if you don't use data context, then your full query is going to be in the data ref. If you use data context, then you can build from that to add up to your full query. And then you have cascading rules. You know, I didn't change the cascading rules, but because I thought, you know, hey, they're there, so everybody knows them. So this is what the data dev would look like. There's a whole bunch of stuff. This is not really tested in real life yet. You know, I'm still building I have my test installation, and that works. But to make it more generic, I'd have to add some data elements, etc., and to, you know, get this to full bloom. But this is basically identifying the source where you can go and fetch your data. So it might be, in this case, it's a PHP server that runs a MySQL server and a MySQL service, and that's where you get your data from. You need the user ID, password, that kind of stuff. And then there's a delivery target PDF. It says resolve value on publish. So for PDF, it doesn't make sense to do resolve on load, because, you know, your PDF is made and it's fixed, right? But for HTML5, you could do on load, which means when you load the page, the HTML page in the browser, that's when the data gets filled in, which makes it independent of, you know, the data source is going to be updated even though you don't have to republish your HTML page, right? And then just to tickle your imagination, you know, mine was already tickled like a long time ago. If you have HTML5, then there would be a possibility to have a write back function. So an engineer sees the HTML5 and he sees, hey, there's an error in the data, and they can log in, so it becomes editable. They just punch in the new data, push a button, save, and it saves it straight into the database. Why not? I know security risk, all that kind of stuff, so nobody might ever start using it except for me, but, you know, it's possible. So how do you pull data out of a database? Well, one option is, you know, the most obvious option, where you only need a data ref, is you have a table. And what you do is you specify maybe one row of entries. You have a call spec, etc. So you set the size of the columns. But you have, and then you have the header, and then it's basically an empty table with just one empty row in it. And then you say source data 1, table, product data, fields, item name, price, stock, order name, stock. You can also add filter, etc. Right? And then when this is resolved during publish time, then you get the entire table. Everything that is currently in the database that fits your filtering and your specifications, right? This works totally also in the HTML page. There's no problem with that. Now, pulling a table from a database and putting it into your data content, you might have a special XSLT that creates a reference topic that has the whole data. So that's nothing really special. It becomes more special when you start using the cascading rules. And you look at, for example, this topic is about item 1001. The entire so that's the context. So every query will use item 1001 as part of it. Then in a section where you're talking about the product data, you might have a table that contains all the product data. So now this adds up. So now you have the item, you have the table, then you do a data ref field name. That's the only thing you still have to specify, because then you have a full query. You have that table, that item, that field, and it pulls it in from the database, right? If you want to override one of those snippets in the query, then you just add it to your data ref. So if I want to compare it to item 42 field name, then I just put item 42, which overrides the item 1001 of the topic. So it's, you know, it's fairly straightforward once you get that idea done. And then of course you have in another section you might want to talk about maintenance, and then same thing, you just pull the data from different areas in your database like that. I've also been experimenting and thinking about doing this with XML databases, because I've been using a lot of XML databases lately and doing XQuery. And the nice thing about XPath is that you can also cut it up in little pieces and say, okay, I'm going to tag this onto what I already have and just add to it, etc., to specify the full path to something that is in an XML database. And the nice thing about an XML database compared to SQL is that you cannot only take, so in SQL basically you can pull a whole table or one item, which would be a phrase or like a keyword or a term, like a phrase type of element. But it's very hard to pull a whole section unless you have a NoSQL database where you store all kinds of sections like that. But normally that wouldn't be the case. In an XML database, you might have a whole section that is part of a document, an XML document that is stored in your XML database. So now you can pull any element from the database instead of just phrases and tables. And again, this would work basically with, you know, appending all of those little snippets of an XPath together, and then with the same attributes. So unfortunately, I do not have a demo today. I was working on one, I had one working, and then my crappy XAMPP MySQL server died just before I could make a backup. And there is no way that I have found, and there is no documented way on the web to restore the data, only the data in a newly installed MySQL, you know, like XAMPP package, to get the data directory from an old Mac backup and to push it in there and then say, hey, you know, get it. It could see the tables, but it couldn't find them, and it claimed that they didn't exist. So I have no data, so no demo. I'm working on getting that data up and running, because I have a talk about this on Tuesday, so I still have 1.5 days to go. And who needs sleep anyway? So to-dos. More SQL options. I already have the filtering and the sorting, so ascending and descending. You know, that's already working, but I might want to add something like the like operator in SQL, you know, like matching substrings. I'm not sure about NoSQL. I don't know how, you know, a lot of people are talking about MongoDB and that kind of stuff, etc., and NoSQL databases. I don't know how useful it would be and how hard it would be to do this kind of work for a NoSQL database. Of course, I need to seriously make some time to create a DITA-OT toolkit plugin for this kind of thing, because then people might actually start using it. I still need to create the write-back code for HTML5. I already have all the editability, etc. in HTML5, but now it needs to go back into the database. That should not be a big thing. And then every once in a while I need to do some paid work as well. So, any queries? Yes?
When you're doing replacement, are you always replacing the text within an element, or could you actually update an attribute of an element? What I'm thinking about is in the case where you might want to dynamically change the URL, you want to change the href of an external xref. Would that be possible?
Okay, so the question is, can I only change the text content of an element, you know, in the HTML output, or maybe also an attribute? Well, of course, the attribute is, that would require some more thinking, because of course the attribute that pulls in the data is an attribute of an element. So normally you would pull in the content of the element. If you have an XML database, you could actually pull in the element around it that would include the attribute. But yeah, that would be like, that would require some thinking about, okay, would it be possible to pull that value into an attribute? I don't know yet how that conceptually could be done.
The use case here would be where people move their external links from place to place, and you need to refresh all the external URLs. Otherwise, you're breaking links externally from the thing. Having a database of where things are supposed to be very useful.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I have to wrap my head around the implications for the whole concept, whether that would be doable at all. Yeah.
Wouldn't a key work for that use case? I just change the key and you have all the references that they.
The database would be useful. Unless, of course, you could put I don't know how you could keep the URL and reference it in the key as an attribute to the XREF.
So maybe you can generate the key def from the database, and that's an element, and then you get everything using that key.
Hold on.
Yeah, so you would have to, if you want to make it possible with this without going into changing the attribute values, which would be hard conceptually, you would probably create a separate page where the key definitions are as text, and then make those go into the database, and then you would change the content of a key def, which is doable. Yeah, and in worst case, you'll have to create your own piece of code that,
Oh, free code!
I know. Everybody wants free code. Yes.
Congratulations. I think you've developed a pretty interesting concept.
Thank you.
What I understood is not what remains to be seen. Two questions. What was your motivation for doing this? And secondly, what would be your based on the status of development, what would be a real live application which you can imagine you would support?
Okay, well, are you going to be at DITA Europe the next couple of days?
I'm leaving tomorrow morning.
Okay. Watch the recording. I am preparing a demo that's why I was working so hard all day during the presentations to get all kinds of data that look like real life data from a large manufacturer of all kinds of paints, and they have these typical data sheets with hundreds of pages, and basically every page is almost the same. Some things are specific, but they have one section that is full of data that is just pulled out of a database by tech authors. And I find that method of copying it from the database into your DITA content so horribly outdated. If you ask my motivation to do this, well, I'm a total anarchist. I don't like stuff that's stuck, right? I want to have everything as dynamic as possible. So yeah, that was my motivation. And then of course I've done a lot of work in machine industry where a lot of authors are just copy pasting stuff from a database. And if you have a section that refers to fields that are in a database and you put the item at the topic level, then you can reuse this section without ever touching it in all kinds of different items, and it will just fill in the blanks with different data. It's just maximizing reuse to a scale that in machine industry we haven't seen, because they have a lot of copies of topics where just the data is changed, and that's stupid.
You have time out. You finish the
Okay.
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh.
How are we going to find out when you upload the plugin?
Well, don't you check the DITA Open Toolkit site like every week?
Every hour.
You probably, Jang will announce that on DITA users or different channels. Right?
Check smartdita.com. That's where I'm going to push up my tools, and both the paid and the unpaid ones. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.